Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to be talking about a little black book that's simply titled, I Know Who You Are, and I Saw What You Did. Kind of sounds like one of them teenage-type movies that we go out during the summertime and figure out what's going to be happening as teens slowly disappear. Well, you know, this book here is about as alarming as something like that when you begin to read in between its covers on something that at first many of us might have thought was a very interesting as well as innocent pursuit, and that is to be able to share information over the Internet with friends and family, perhaps even work people and colleagues. Places such as Twitter and Facebook have made themselves available on free formats, so we're told, to be able to share what was known as personal information. It could be photos, it could be thoughts, it could be ideas, it could be expressed words, you name it. But we never knew that something like that might come back to haunt us later in ways that we could have never even imagined. On the program today, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about and how it applies to our daily lives and really what we can do to perhaps not only just protect us, but how maybe these particular platforms, that exist can have their own sort of rules and regulations. On the program today is our guest, who is the author of this book. She is a law professor and the director for the Institute of Science, Law, and Technology at Illinois Institute of Technology. She's been on many major programs, including ours as well, and she's joining us here to talk about her book, I Know Who You Are, and I Saw What You Did. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program our guest, Ms. Lori Andrews. Lori, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here, Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I take it that you created this title from I Know Who You Are and I Saw What You Did.
You know, I like the feeling of the noir movie where, there's a subtle surveillance, but we don't know that it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And that indeed is what's going on as data aggregators collect information about our travels across the web. Increasingly, our online self is more important than our offline self. So now 75% of companies require that their human resource people check out people's online presence before offering them a job.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have, 1/3 of employers saying they will not hire someone if on their Facebook page they have a drink in their hand or are wearing provocative clothing, even if it's innocent picture from a wedding, say.
Mm-hmm.
And amazingly, some employers are now asking employees for their private passwords, where you can't get a job unless you reveal that, private part of yourself that you thought you were just disclosing to friends. And they might be party photos, or it might be, you say your job is boring, or you hate your brother, or any such thing. And so our right to privacy and right to free speech is being eroded by the use of social networks.
And here it is, and you mentioned there earlier about, one of the photos could be you with a drink in your hand. And when I read this story of a teacher who's in Ireland and she's having a pint of Guinness, takes a picture, sends it to friends. The next thing you know, she's in the hot seat about to lose her teaching job. And I thought to myself, are we just getting stupid? And the stories got worse and worse in many cases. Like, I can't believe that we're about to, for those people who really enjoy going to their sermons on Sundays, are breaching the sin of thou shalt not judge. But boy, it's really going on in something like this, isn't it?
It's astonishing how even innocent pictures can come back to haunt you.
Especially having a pint of Guinness in Ireland. That's legal as far as I know.
Yeah.
But things were...
Yeah, so she was a 24-year-old woman. She had not friended any of her high school students or their parents. So she was a teacher, but, had this private Facebook page. And she went to Ireland on her summer vacation, perfectly legal, posted hundreds of pictures, perfectly legal. 3 of them were her taking the Guinness factory tour. They're adorable pictures. They're not drunken pictures. They're going on a tour in Ireland.
Believe me, as a bartender, I know how bad it can get.
Woo! Yeah. And so she's won my heart with that because she lost her job over that. But then there was an injured woman in New York. She suffered an injury on the job, needed 3 spinal surgeries, pins were put in her neck, and the other side asked for access to all her MySpace photos and other online things. And the judge gave it to him, saying if there's a photo of her smiling, that must indicate she's not really harmed. But didn't even ask if the photo was from before the accident. And I kind of feel like people should be able to show a stiff upper lip on the web, even if you're in pain or whatever. You could. You want to create an online image. I mean, think about Match.com. People want to put their best foot forward, and we shouldn't be discouraging that.
We couldn't agree more. Now, your book, just to let the listeners know out there, I don't know that this is something I would recommend that you read as you're laying in bed getting ready to go to sleep for the night, because believe me, before you know it, you start stiffening up a little bit and going, oh my goodness, and you start right off by talking about these online social platforms. And for many people who participate in these things, there was a wonderful charm and sort of a sense of virtual freedom that things like this offer. But then you start realizing how this information that you begin to produce and send out, this even goes for website searches. And one of them in particular I'd like you to talk a little bit about as we launch in further into what you've written here about I Know Who You Are and I Saw What You Did, is one known as Spokio.
So data aggregators make money by selling to third parties or advertisers private information about you.
Right.
And so people can go on the website Spokeo, SPOKEO.com, and put their name in. And you'll see they have often a picture of your house, your address, your private cell phone number. They offer anybody more information, for a few dollars a month, can find out things you've posted on the web and so forth. And the big issue there is that employers are using this to find out about potential employees. And in fact, a couple people have not been hired because they were pictures of themselves with guns. There are whole parts of our country where people hunt and so forth. And so that it's accessible to employers. It's also accessible to credit card companies and people offering loans. Now, if a credit reporting bureau put something up about your financial worth that led to you being denied a credit card, you would have to be told about it. You would have to have the chance to correct it. But Spokeo puts up a bunch of stuff. Sometimes it's totally wrong, and yet judgments are being made based on it. And so far in litigation, the courts have not applied the Fair Credit Reporting Act to it. It's pretty astonishing. There was just a report last week where a woman who'd been raped years earlier, and the man was never brought to justice, but continued to haunt her and torment her, moved to another state, and the guy came to her new unlisted apartment, and she said, I think he found me on Spokeo.
My goodness.
Sort of information. So you've got the physical risk of things, the financial risk that come up, and just huge risks where one woman lost her child in a custody case because she posted something sexy on her boyfriend's MySpace page. Well, that has nothing to do with whether she would be a good mother or not.
Right.
And in one case, the judge is trying to decide whether a father should lose custody because he liked a viral video that millions of people saw where Burger King shot Ronald McDonald in the face. And so does liking a violent video mean that you're a bad dad? Well, think of, everybody who watches CSI or Law and Order. Are we all gonna lose our kids over this?
Yeah, what's also alarming too, see, at first you take a look at something like this and we realize that, for instance, we start waiving the freedom of speech, which we're allowed to have. And in this country, I think sometimes that's something that a lot of people take for granted a lot more than they're aware of, because in other countries it's not so easy to do this. And you were also talking about how also in other countries they tend to have rules and regulations about the use of the Internet that really kind of put in place some really good protections. And I started thinking about some parallels, like, for instance, gun control in America, how we have, the right to bear arms, for instance, but yet the United States bears more death by gunshots or, the use of guns than any other country in the world. And it seems like the Internet, for us, isn't that much different.
Yeah, it really is a wild west. So think about this. If I do a Google search for hand tremors or some other medical condition, and maybe I'm doing it for a relative or a friend or because I'm writing a mystery novel in which a character has hand tremors, that is thought, without my even knowing it, to be about me. That information is collected, and then if I go on a life insurance site later on to buy life insurance, I'll be offered a lower amount, a less good policy, because of an assumption that if I've searched for any medical thing, and I think most of us have probably searched for medical things, whether we're prescribed a new drug and we want to look up the side effects, or we have a rash. And,
it could be a Yahoo News item about Kim Kardashian and cocaine, and the next thing you know, you further step this, and it's you and having a relationship with her over a pile of cocaine.
No, whole criminal cases have been built on Google searches.
Right.
So if my sister were to disappear, and I happen to have, for one of my mystery books that I write, Google the depth of a lake nearby or some sort of poison. Mm-hmm. It's really interesting how this is thought to be the real you. Your digital doppelganger is thought to be you. And you mentioned Europe, and they do have some interesting protections. One is that you have a right to know what information companies have been collecting about you. So an Austrian law student wrote to Facebook and said, well, what data do you have about me? And Facebook sent him a CD-ROM with 1,600 PDFs on it that showed everything he'd ever posted, deleted, every relationship he was in, everything he looked at while his Facebook page was open on other websites. And so at least there you can find out and you can correct. And they're actually considering putting in place a right to be forgotten. If you think about this country, we were really based on the idea you could start over. We have all sorts of laws like bankruptcy, where you can, start again, build your life.
Well, look, if Lindsay Lohan can pick it back up again, hey, anybody can.
Yeah, but that's not the case. Okay, so you may have an expression, life begins at 50, but life might end at 15 if you posted something violent, or that then is used against you in terms of job hiring, whether you get into college. It's astonishing. Now, in college, college athletes are now required in many places to friend the coach. Mm-hmm. The coach can spy on what pictures are put up and so forth. You mentioned freedom of speech, and my concern is that the web was supposed to expand that. We could do all sorts of creative things and make contact with other people who had our same interests. But if people keep getting fired, if now 1 in 4 college admissions officers isn't admitting people because of their social network profile, we're going to start getting nearer and nearer in what we disclose. One poor woman was fired, a 16-year-old, because she said her job was boring on Facebook, which it probably was, and she didn't even mention the company.
Wow.
There's another thing, because our technologies, we sometimes don't realize how privacy invading they are, and I mentioned in the book the Pennsylvania case where a high school gave out free laptops to students, didn't tell the students or their parents that the high school could remotely turn on.
I remember that. I was like, my goodness, this is like the town of Stepford, for crying out loud.
Absolutely. I'm in a hotel room right now. I have my laptop open in front of me.
And I can't see what you're doing.
Yeah, but someone might, And so for people who aren't even in high school, many people are downloading apps without realizing the information they collect. Like it was just revealed 2 weeks ago that Angry Birds collects your location information. They know where you are when you're playing Angry Birds and the numbers of everybody you call. Mm-hmm. Your phone. So why do they need that information? Another interesting app is called Into Now. So if I'm watching a television show, that app allows the mic on my phone to, input the sound, and they can figure out what TV show I'm watching. And so, say I watch The Good Wife, and it'll put me in a chat room with other people who love The Good Wife, and then maybe it'll show me how I can buy one of the suits a woman is wearing on The Good Wife. But without your knowing it, that remote activation of your mic allows them to collect other information, like, do you eat at restaurants? Do you have dinner at home? You have sex with people of the same sex or the other, the opposite sex? So it's really astonishing how, technology has come into play. You might be interested. One radio host took a picture of his car and posted it with his iPhone and posted it on his Facebook page. He didn't realize that these digital pictures have geotags in them, which tells a location of where the picture was taken. So then all these fans, etc., knew exactly where he lived and could show up at his house. But if it's someone posting a picture in their home where they have expensive jewelry or expensive art, there's now a term, cyber casing, where thieves use that information to find you and steal the stuff. Mm-hmm. In New Hampshire, there were 50 robberies of people who posted they were on vacation, on their Facebook page.
Lori, and that's, brings up a couple of things that I considered alarming, but then it also borders the line of stupidity, for instance. This is a social network, and we agree that, especially as Facebook started out, that, this is private. It's between you and the people that basically you invite into your network. But you also give an alarming timeline about, and we've heard quite a bit about this, especially lately with the IPO sale of Facebook, of the fact that over time they've pretty much eroded their privacy policy. In other words, Mark Zuckerberg and company love the billions of dollars they're getting, and there's a quote in the movie Iron Man that I really enjoy, and that is that we've become comfortable with zero accountability. And when you talk about, for instance, about these people that are cyber casing, a funny scene that I actually seen was on a rerun of a 2.5-minute episode where the little boy says to Charlie, please don't go out with my friend's mother, who was a teacher. He says, I won't do it. So the next thing he comes home and the son says, so you went out with her, didn't you? And he says, well, no, I didn't. And so he whips out his laptop and shows a picture. He says, well, here's a picture of your car. And he says, well, that's not my car. He says, well, here's a picture of you kissing her in front of your car. I thought, wait a minute. It's amazing just how transparent our lives are. And that's what, that Zuckerberg talked about, is that we should have this. And I'm thinking, well, no, where do you really draw the line, especially when it comes to something like that? You talk also about cyberbullying and these people that are anonymous, for instance, and all of a sudden there's no accountability, even though there's some serious damage going on here.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's made it worse is that when the whole Internet phenomenon started, a federal law was adopted to protect the Internet, and said that the Internet couldn't be treated as publishers are. And so that makes sense because, if I defame you in an AOL email to a friend, AOL really had nothing to do with it.
Right.
But that's been turned on its head because it allows websites to do things like be a website entirely devoted to defamatory things like don't date my ex, or a website that's entirely devoted to invading privacy, like one where men post nude pictures of their ex-girlfriends, and in ways that we'd never allow the print media or television to get away with.
Right.
And in a particularly troubling case against Craigslist, how in housing ads there are laws that say you cannot run an ad in, an Oregon newspaper that says no blacks allowed.
Right.
But on Craigslist, since this federal law says you're not a publisher, they can run that say no blacks allowed. And so our values from offline are being, corrupted online because we don't have the same protections of privacy, of, And yet we're doing more and more on the web, so I consider when I email my doctor that that's private, but one New York judge has said, oh, no, your emails are like a postcard. You just should assume anybody can read them.
Right. And that's what I also found kind of crazy, too, is the way even the law, I mean, judges, for instance, that take a look at this, and, they're supposed to be in a position of integrity, and I remember as I was reading about that particular sort of thing you were talking about is that you write an email, it's private. You send it, once it's opened up, it becomes public domain, and I thought to myself, really, what's the difference and where does it end?
Really? I think you're so right. Judges are getting it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
To say that you have two choices, private, where you don't tell anybody or never send an email in your life, and public, where you let one other person know, that's just wrong. That isn't what the law actually is, because we protect all sorts of things, even though you've said them to another person. If I tell my symptoms to my doctor in his office, you can't put it in the National Enquirer, or if I, have a meeting with a lawyer. We also even have state tort laws that say there's a cause of action for publication of private facts about someone else. So it's clearly not the case that once you open your mouth, you're not entitled to any protections. And so I'm hoping by highlighting these issues and getting, the word out to judges about how every other technology in the past that could invade privacy, from the portable camera to forensic technologies to medical technologies, the courts have actually expanded privacy and protected people. And so I'm trying to get them to do the same thing here. One helpful note is that the recent Jones case in the Supreme Court, where the justices decided unanimously that it, violated the Fourth Amendment, the unreasonable searches and seizures, for the police to put a GPS tracking device on a man's car for 28 days, this long-term surveillance. And Judge Sotomayor said something really, really fascinating, which was she pointed out how your location reveals so much about you. You could be going to a psychiatrist's office, or she said, or a church, or a synagogue, or a mosque. You could be going to a divorce lawyer. And so they were willing to protect against the police location information. And yet, in the new change in Google's policies, Google is collecting your location information off your Droid phone even when you turn the GPS off, which is astonishing. You make the decision, I don't want to be tracked, and yet they still track you.
And even furthermore, when it comes to Google, what I was really astounded by is this was probably, a few months ago, I was actually looking up something, and literally you're on the street, and it's as though you're driving a car as you're seeing this online of how to find this place, as if you were driving a car. And I thought, how much more does it go to here? The next thing you know, somebody's doing that, and they're pulling up, and they're seeing me walk through my front door. It's crazy.
Sure. Well, Google makes $36.5 billion a year, which is 96% of their income, by trading on this private information about you. And there are some really troublesome things. So sometimes it may not seem that bad. If I shop at a particular store, they might then send me a coupon for that store. If my favorite band's playing someplace, they'll let me know about that. But they also have admitted that in the Google chat rooms pertaining to suicide, when a young person says, I'm thinking of committing suicide using X chemical, ads actually pop up that say, call 1-800 blah, blah, blah now for one this chemical. So you've got that, and you've got the use then in a negative way, where the information of what I looked at, like if I sent an email to a divorce lawyer or looked up old guitars, and then I go to a credit card site, I get a less good credit card because divorcing people are more likely to renege, and guitar players are less likely to pay off their credit cards. So
right.
these kind of innocent things I've done, like out of curiosity. I mean, you know how you get to one page and then it goes to another page. You know, it may not even, guitars might not have even been my interest, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I end up there and have it used against me.
You know, and again, you know, and pertaining, because as you read this, there are things that really get on your nerves, and you think, where did common sense become uncommon? And especially when you're reading about, for instance, the cyberbullying, and this does happen, but quite often actually, and why you know this is take a look at the Yahoo comments when somebody does something, and the things that people post and the language they use, and you think, okay, well, that's easy for you to do because you're anonymous, you're spineless in many cases. You know, I can say whatever I want, that's my opinion, okay, but then your opinion or your what you have to say, for instance, you're talking about somebody who's thinking of being suicidal, begins to be tormented over the edge by these anonymous people, and I think, and then you talk about how it looked like, or that the courts had actually protected these people to retain their anonymity, and I'm thinking, weren't they just pretty much bordering on the complicity of murder here? I mean, Dr. Kevorkian was helping people assisted away from their suffering, and here people are coercing or pushing people into their suffering. But hey, you can't do anything about it. It's on the internet, and I deserve my anonymity. And it's like, it's crazy. Where do we draw the line there?
Yeah, I think that's the toughest thing. We believe in free speech, but there's a case now on appeal in Minneapolis about whether there is such a thing as lethal advocacy. And this was a case where a college student was feeling depressed, and she thought she found a friend over the internet, a person who described herself as a young nurse named Cammie, and Cammie's like, oh, you can't do anything for depression. You should really kill yourself, and here's how to go to Home Depot and find the exact right kind of rope to hang yourself, and that's the best way. You don't feel any pain. You know, just relentlessly, instead of saying to this poor girl, you know, have you called your parents? Have you seen a psychologist? Maybe you just need to take a few days off of classes, you know, whatever. And it turned out that Cammie was actually an older man with teenage daughters of his own who got his sick kicks out of pushing people to suicide and you know, and coercing them to, in many cases, hang themselves in front of their webcam. He would say, let's do this together, I'll hang myself, you know, posing as this young woman. And, you know, he was tried for pushing a young woman to suicide and also a young man. But that's going up on appeal where he's saying, well, that's just my right to free speech. The trial court judge did a really interesting thing, though. He said, listen, people have a right to free speech. You could write a book about suicide. You could, you know, put a video on YouTube about it. But no one has a right to single out and coerce vulnerable people, vulnerable individuals. And that's what's going on in the cyber bullying. I mean, astonishing. So a 40-year-old woman gets upset with a 17-year-old girl. And the 40-year-old woman posts the girl's picture, phone number, and where she works in the casual sexual encounters section of Craigslist. The poor 17-year-old gets a lot of nude texts. She's got men calling her and showing up at the Sonic restaurant where she works. She feels like she's been set up to be killed or raped. Goes to trial, no liability for the woman. She basically said, listen, there were pictures of the girl at the Sonic restaurant on her MySpace page, so that information was already public. Well, it wasn't public in the way as if the girl were hoping random strangers would have sex with her. And so, I mean, we really need to start, you know, supporting our important cultural values of the right to privacy and, you know, and the right to fair trial, to not have these the internet overtake our offline rights. If you think about it, if someone broke into my house to get private information, that would be trespass or invasion of privacy. If the cops tap my phone, that would violate the wiretap statutes. But we haven't presented those same protections to people online.
I know, Lori, that you talk about, for instance, something that I kind of find this, as I was reading about it, funny, and because of how what we're talking about, how these people, well, I deserve the right to express my opinion. And even though it may have negative circumstances, in this case causing someone to actually commit suicide, that you can't come after me because I was anonymous, and you don't have the right to know who I am. So I thought to myself, as you go further in the book, know who you are and saw what you did. Okay, well, that's fine. So let's just say, for instance, that you have this opinion, and you happen to become a juror. Now, you talk quite extensively how a lot of times jury members will actually sit there and Google and text and get information as they're involved in a trial that might persuade or even sway what their vote may be toward a particular person. Now, maybe people who are listening to this program have not served on juries, but generally the whole idea behind when you're a juror is to make a decision based on all evidence that's been presented in a closed court setting, in my understanding. Okay.
Yeah, so the other side has a chance to cross-examine the witness.
Right. And so here's what's interesting about this. Okay, so you start like this guy waving the idea, look, I deserve to stay anonymous. I should have the right for you not to find out who I am, even though I pushed somebody over the edge. So let's just say that you're that juror with that attitude. I have the right to look outside of my realm against the wishes of the judge. Well, what happens when you're in the hot seat and now you're aware some of these people who are about to judge you is based on evidence and things that are outside of the courtroom, so now it's all been switched. Oh, wait a minute, I deserve, well, wait, that wasn't your attitude when you were on the other side of the mirror.
No, absolutely, and the fair trial right is really being, we're running roughshod over it because you're totally right. Jurors are Googling, like, the scene of the crime, or they're looking up key concepts from the case, or they're looking at the MySpace pages of witnesses. Is that credible or not? And in one case, they actually, a juror couldn't decide, so she posted the facts of a criminal case on her Facebook page. Asked her friends to vote up or down. Should we fly to
While he was drinking beer, no less, and had a picture of that as well.
Oh my gosh, but it is so true that, those people who are doing it do not want it to be done to them. And I think about a case which had to do with a website, Auto Admit, which was supposed to be for smart law students and lawyers. Auto Admit is like you get such good grades, you're automatically admitted to law school. To tell them, Stanford versus, University of Illinois, whatever, or to let them know about judicial clerkships. Well, it turned into a cyber cesspool where everybody ganged up. A lot of men on the site ganged up on two female law students.
I remember that, yes.
And said horrible things like they should be raped, and so they only got in because they were having sex with the dean, all these untrue things. But since this was searchable by Google, it would be the first thing that came up about these women. And the guy who ran the website hid under the federal law that said websites can't be held responsible for, defamation that's posted or horrible things that are posted. So he was totally shocked when the law firm that had offered him a job took back the offer.
Which I thought was great.
Yeah, so,
Karma can work even on the Internet.
Yeah, so he basically said, well, it's legal what I did, ha, ha, ha. And the law firm said, listen, there are basic rules of civility.
Right.
You don't do this to other human beings. And one reason we have so much cyberbullying, and particularly against women. And so women who have, particularly in the high-tech industry, have often then been singled out where male competitors will post a Google map of their house on the web and claim to be the woman and say, I have rape fantasies, come rape me. So you get women who are like being actually run out of their jobs in a way because they're afraid to go on the Internet. And part of the reason is that there's something called the online disinhibition effect, where since you don't see the other person's face, and since you're in the safety of your own home, when you're posting these really nasty things, you don't sort of internalize the impact that it's having.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, we're just seeing this huge increase in the studies of teens. 88% have witnessed cyberbullying, and unlike, bullying on the playground, it follows you home. Adults might not be aware of it. So many, many things. And we should also talk about how, new technologies are coming along that make it worse. There's a patent filed for a company called Peek You, and it would mean if I didn't know you and saw you going down the street, I could hold up my smartphone, and it would compare your image to through facial recognition to other pictures of you on the web. All of a sudden, I'd have all the pictures you've posted, and then it would use your name related to that to tell me if you posted things on websites, had a blog, or on dating sites, and so forth. And so, I think it's time we take back our privacy. Privacy serves really important individual and social purposes. It's actually psychologically beneficial to have sort of a slow reveal where the people you trust most and are getting close to, you reveal information bit by bit, not everything at once.
Mm-hmm.
And, and even though we kind of think of younger people as not caring about privacy since they do put up so much stuff about their lives, the 18 to 29-year-olds are actually the most concerned about privacy and choose the highest privacy settings. And 91% of people think there should be a delete button. So some lawmakers are working on that.
Yeah, you really hope that encouragingly that this does change. Again, as I was mentioning earlier in the program, sure, you can go on and sure, Facebook is saying, hey, come on to our platform, doesn't cost you anything, talk to anybody in the world, make friends, have the same interests as social groups, so forth and so on. And then, as you give that timeline that you did, showing how that eroded away, and why wouldn't it? There's more and more money being made by these guys, and they don't really care. But it's even getting to a point, as we had a futurist expert on our program, that as we try to protect our privacy and the information we don't want a lot of people to know, that this is going to actually change on people's heads, that you'll be willing to sell this because now these platforms will turn around and say, how about if you just let us pay you for your private information? And, that's likened to, a pound of flesh for a pound of gold, for crying out loud, but only in virtual reality.
Yeah. And so Allow Limited, a company in England, has started doing that. Mm-hmm. But it's like, some information is just too valuable for you to give away. Think about how we protect our medical records in the hands of doctors, in the hands of hospitals, with HIPAA and everything else. But one social network, Patients Like Me, allowed people separated by distance who had rare diseases to post, what worked for them, what didn't, what doctors were good, all this very, very personal.
Which makes the Internet a wonderful tool, actually.
Absolutely. So just the reason...
Try the old card catalog at the library.
Yeah. Then one data aggregator, Nielsen, posed as a patient, put tracking mechanisms on the website, and started collecting everybody's personal information from there. Mm-hmm. When people found out about it, they started pulling themselves off of it. Why would you post if this would be available to employers and so forth? You can't explore things like, why you're feeling anxious and what might be a healthy way to get out of it, without drugs and so forth. And so I think, as you say, that's a wonderful use of a social network. It's really beneficial to be able to keep in touch with people across the years, to, share your emotional state with your best friends who may be in a different time zone and so forth. And yet I worry with these privacy breaches that people will just start pulling down their things like they did on Patients Like Me, and we won't get the benefits of it because of the privacy risks.
Right.
Now, there are a couple of people, Senator Al Franken, Congressman Ed Markey, Congressman Joe Barton, in Congress who are starting to think about this and do things more favorable toward privacy. The Federal Trade Commission is doing more looking into a do not track mechanism where you can opt out of these tracking mechanisms on your computer. So, there is some hope, but when I started writing this book, I had no idea that there were companies like Axiom, which has 1,500 pieces of information on 96% of Americans, including, their credit scores, what medicines they use, and that they make that information available to advertisers and others.
I myself, it took me a while before I even had a personal computer, and because I felt you could go about life without one. And for the most part, I still feel the same way, even though I broadcast an internet radio show now. But that is like, for instance, these social networks like Twitter. The only thing I ever post on Twitter is usually highlights of what an upcoming show is going to be. Facebook, I really haven't had a whole lot of interaction with that, but I certainly don't plan on using it for any more information than you could find anywhere else. I'm certainly not going to say a whole lot about myself, because that's not why I would use something like that. Because to me it was likened to, you've got this diary, now you've opened it to what you thought were your friends and close relations. But really what you've done is you've opened it to the whole world. And again, what's really bothersome is how, for instance, like Facebook has this attitude, well, really you signed the agreement by, pushing I agree to use our platform service for free, and in return we didn't, we told you in all of our language, and 280,000 words or better, that yes, you've surrendered your right to stay anonymous. Yeah. And the point being is that really, folks, one of the biggest ways to protect yourself, that is if it's even possible on the Internet, is that if somebody is offering you something for free, that it's really not for free, and to always be mindful of something like that, especially when you hit an I agree or I do not agree button when it comes to terms and conditions.
Yeah, and I'd like to see us as a society go further to not allow them to make those sort of deals. They say, by using Facebook, you agree to let us use your picture and post in ads. Well, why should they have the right to do that? And think about it, privacy is a fundamental value under the U.S. Constitution. We wouldn't let companies get away with saying, oh, if you use our service, you have to give up your right to vote or your right to have children, other fundamental values. But I think what's happened here is, we just don't realize this kind of sneakiness is going on, that on the back end, that millions of deals are being made a day with companies in order to harvest those bits of information, about us. And that even, it's funny because for a long time, because I've written for years about privacy, their settings, I didn't order anything online. I didn't order an airplane ticket. I didn't order a book off Amazon.com. And then one of my research assistants at the law school wanted a Christmas present that you could only get on stupid.com. So, where they sell things like Freudian slippers and, just all sorts of funny little gag things.
Right.
And so all of a sudden, here I am, middle-aged, mid-America law professor.
And you're getting offered naked Teletubby soap on a rope.
Yeah. So one of the offers was like, they had, on the website I remember they had like, 50 heads for Farrah Fawcett dolls. I don't know what happened to the bodies or whatever, but they have a bunch of kooky stuff. So, but now, even just in writing this book, it's fascinating to watch how the ads to me change based on what I was looking at. Mm-hmm. So now I have, ads to train me as a Homeland Security, officer, because I looked up the 350 terms that Homeland Security monitors in your email, which includes such innocuous terms as vaccine, pork, and the term social media itself.
Right.
Those are on the hot words for Homeland Security.
For those of you just joining us, the book is I Know Who You Are, and I Saw What You Did. Our guest today, Lori Andrews. We're talking about the death of social networks and privacy. Excuse me, it was social networks and the death of privacy, but I think it's both the death of social networks. Boy, there might be a precognition there. Who knows? Now, first of all, before you get into the idea that one of the things you're advocating about, as I understand, is to create a constitution for the Internet, which is something I think really should be. It's time that you're real in the Wild West. Just because you get upset the guy was messing around on your wife doesn't mean that, like in the days of John Wayne, you whip out a 6-shooter and you drop him. You know, that's just crazy. But first of all, what I'd like you to do before you talk about how the idea of the Constitution, the 10 rights that we should be allowed to have on the Internet that protect us, what really launched you into this direction? Was there something personal that had happened, or what was going on there that really inspired you to write this book?
There were two things. One was more global, the fact that Facebook had 850 million members, and so was
my goodness,
was the third largest nation in the world.
Yeah, that's like almost
China and India.
2.5 United States populations right there. Yeah.
And so they were like a country. They had their own currency. They had citizens. They had means of resolving disputes. They had relationships with other countries even. Mm-hmm. And so I wondered what their how they operated, what their politics were. And as soon as I looked at it, it made me think, well, like other nations, they really need a constitution. On the personal level, I went to a law school reunion, and I got friended by the daughter of a law school classmate. And she was trying to get into a good college, but her news feed from her Facebook page always said she was playing the game Mafia Wars.
Oh, no.
So, and I said to her, college admissions people look at that, and she didn't believe me. And so I started collecting the studies, I started collecting the cases, and I realized there was this tsunami of legal study about this. And so I had enough to teach a course on the law of social networks, and then I had enough to write a book on social networks because it really was making a difference in people's lives. And we don't have the rights you do in other countries. So in Finland, for example, there's a law that says you can't Google potential employees, and that came out of the fact that an employer was about to offer a job to someone, then Googled him and found that he had gone to a mental health conference. It's bad enough to discriminate against someone who's into a job because they, might have a mental health issue, but this guy had actually gone there as a patient representative, wasn't even there as a patient, and he lost the job. So the upshot of that was Finland having a law that you can't Google potential employees. So with the Social Network Constitution, as I looked at our rights offline and how they might be used to apply online.
Mm-hmm. And you have 10 that I see listed here, but you go back to the whole thing and you think to yourself, okay, sure, you believe the rules should favor to protect you, even though you know pretty much what you did probably wasn't the right thing to do. But when that reverses on you, then you realize, well, wait a minute, don't I, can I be protected here from this kind of nonsense? So as you talked about, for instance, with a law student who got the job and then turned around and said, your history, you're just not very ethical for one thing. But to take a look at this and to realize why, for instance, platforms and how the Internet itself, for instance, with people like Google and so forth, needs to be really governed with a lot more strength as far as, like for instance, you're saying this guy goes to find out information about a patient, now he loses his job, that information should disappear unless you agree to the fact that that it's going to be archived indefinitely. And if, they post something that says, you agree to this and then we'll continue, then that's one thing, but they're just doing it and holding it forever. That seems to be a totally different thing altogether.
Yeah, and they, so websites like dictionary.com actually put onto your computer 233 tracking mechanisms to collect the data. And that's not uncommon. The websites you visit leave what's called cookies or web beacons or different tracking mechanisms on your computer. And, to me, that's as if I came home and there were, 25 strangers in my house.
Right.
Instead, I think that...
All with a pint of Guinness.
Yeah, none of them should, and not so great for me because I'm allergic to hops. So, but I think those tracking mechanisms shouldn't be there unless we affirmatively invite them by ourselves going to a certain place on the web to ask for them. So if we want something from our favorite store, something we can search it out and get it, it's not that we then have all these people who don't have our interests in mind collecting information, be it medical information, be it information about our personal opinions about our job and so forth. And what's shocking is that the Federal Trade Commission just came out with a report about 2 weeks ago that said that the 50 top websites for children put over 4,000 tracking mechanisms in total.
My goodness.
On kids' iPhones and iPads and computers. So think about it. Do you really want, people knowing, that having the location of your child always known? Do you really want data collected which will make an assessment about them if they went to certain websites and so forth? So it starts early. Congressman Murphy's trying to do a do not track bill. He's done one that got passed for kids up to 13. He's now trying to do one for older kids, because, your life shouldn't be ruined because of something you looked at as a kid.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree with you more, Lori. Now, do you see that on the horizon, and who knows, hopefully soon if you do, that we'll see more and more constitutional protection, especially with these 10 constitutional rights that you're involved with, kind of getting enacted to be able to prevent people from really being harmed by things they shouldn't really be harmed by?
Yeah, so some state laws are being put in place that protect privacy. I was really pleased by the Supreme Court decision about, the right not to have GPS tracking on your car. So I do see some changes, and I would say the past month has been a critical time because with Google changing its privacy policies, there's just been a lot more in the news. There have been a lot more articles and shows like yours which, are revealing how much data is collected about people. People just weren't thinking about it before, and it's never good when a whole industry, builds billion-dollar projects by tricking you. Right. I think it's bound to come crashing down at some point, and I do see a really positive movement, if people can get behind it, to bring, our rights on the web into line with our rights off the web.
I'll tell you, thankfully, on the one hand, due to my own actions, is I don't really, again, as I said earlier, participate in the private sharing of information on Facebook. I'm hardly ever even on it for the most part. In fact, I don't even think I even know how to navigate it, but anyway. But on the other hand, you think of the alarming, for instance, as I was reading, watching that 2.5 Min episode, going, but what if your kid gets upset, takes a picture of you, it can be photoshopped a little bit, the next thing you know, your boss is calling you into the office because you told your daughter or your son they can't go to the dance. I started getting some chills, and I said, now, this definitely isn't a book that you want to read right before going to bed because you won't get any sleep. That's why I hope that there's some very encouraging things on the horizon that will begin to fall into place to protect us. Because I think, with these social platforms, and I'm sure that you agree, they shouldn't be allowed to have so much power that, in essence, it's really a terrorist sort of act, isn't it?
Yeah, we're so worried about government. I mean, think about it. If the government tried to get...
We're doing it to ourselves.
Yeah. And, 93% of the time when the government asks Google for information about your searches and so forth, Google coughs it up. So it's the same as the government having it, but it also is a way to deny us rights where we don't even have the protections we do against government. They can wiretap our computers without a warrant, the companies, where, the government would at least need a warrant to get to us.
Mm-hmm. Now, Lori, if you can, real quickly, give out a website people can find out more about this.
Okay.
Providing there isn't a lot of tracking cookies.
And socialnetworkconstitution.com. Social Network Constitution, since I'm trying to create this constitution.com, or you can get through it through Lori Andrews, Lori Andrews.com. So thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. The book is I Know Who You Are and I Saw What You Did, Social Networks and the Death of Privacy. Our guest today, Ms. Lori Andrews. Lori, again, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Oh, I'm delighted. Thanks for your great questions.
You bet. Thank you. We also want to encourage you, the listeners out there, be sure to visit us at our website, which is beyond50radio.com. We have a free weekly e-newsletter. We're also going to post this program on our blog that's going to be archived there, so that way you can use it at your convenience and share it with others as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.